Explain like I'm 5. How do waveforms know they're being observed? I think I have a decent grasp on the dual slit experiment. But I don't know how the waveforms know when to collapse into a particle. Also, what counts as an observation and what doesn't? I've always felt like observation is poor wording for what's actually going on. In reality, it's the action of interacting with something else that which collapses the waveform. This happens whether or not observes it. It's just that for us to make an observation, we need it to interact with something else. It's that interaction that collapses the wave function. No observer necessary. Think of particles not as actual things that exist but a 3D field in which the energy can potentially manifest itself anywhere in that field. For our mathematical models, and for our logical understanding, the energy exists at all points in that field at once. But it doesn't really exist or manifest itself until it interacts with something. At that point, the energy is where it's at, not any of its potential places, hence the potential places waveform collapses. Basically, an observation somehow interacts with the system, and this interaction causes the collapse. There are 5 interpretations, basically disagreements on what counts as an observation and how the observation causes the collapse. It goes a little beyond explain like I'm 5 for the explanation though. Basically, we know that observing a system requires interaction and that this results in a waveform collapse. But there is disagreement many worlds theory about if the collapse actually happens. When thinking about observation in quantum mechanics, just think of it as extracting information through special tools. In some cases these tools may be photodetectors or cameras. Anything that can aid in gaining insight to where the photons are going. As for why the observation of photons collapses the wave function, it's simply the act of observing or measuring that is doing so. As of to how and why the photons decide to act like particles and collapse the wave function when being observed is a great question. Unsolved. Up for debate and no consensus has been reached. As near as I can tell, this is one of the mysteries physicists are still working to solve. In other words, no one knows for sure. You would know when a blind, deaf person is detecting you because they are touching you with their arms. It's basically the same way for really tiny things. We can't detect them without hitting them with something and watching the bounce. You must interact with the particle to observe it. That changes it somehow. It introduces a slight amount of energy or whatever. That collapses the wave function. Observation isn't the best term. It's how you make the observation that collapses it. Unobserved means nothing has interacted with the particle. Imagine you wanted to work out the speed of a car and the only way you could do it was by throwing a basketball at it and measuring where the basketball bounced after impact. This is fine for cars because basketballs are comparatively light and so don't affect the car at all. However, if you wanted to measure the speed of a ping pong ball after contact, the ping pong ball is going to be going at a new speed and direction because of the impact of the basketball. How can you say you have a decent grasp of the concept while also thinking particles know they're being observed? It's worth mentioning that the Copenhagen interpretation, which is the one that talks about this collapse business, isn't really taken seriously by anyone in this field. Is waveform made of something? I have many doubts. Observation is not the greatest choice of words because most people will think looking at. In this case it doesn't. It means interacting with it. Like shooting a particle at it. A wave going through a slit in the wall, etc. X200b. Things on a quantum size are just too small to simply see it with the naked eye. And even if you could, it would require for light to hit a quantum particle to reflect into our eyes, which would have the result since something interacted with it. More to the point, How do we know what they do when they aren't being observed? Wait, so the difference in dual-slit experiment was they turned a light on to see it? Interacting or measuring it is observation. At the subatomic level, to measure something, you have to interact with it. By interacting with it, change the state of the particle and give it a defined value in one particular aspect. Collapsing the wave function. In your double-slit experiment, the wave function is collapsed by putting a sensor on the slits. The only way the sensor works is by hitting the particle with something and taking a measurement. Hitting the particle with something affects the experiment and collapsing the wave function. Waveforms don't know anything. You need to put energy into or remove energy from a system in order to measure it. Take a thermometer in hot liquid. A small amount of the energy in the liquid is transferred into the thermometer, causing the measurement to change. The energy transferred into the thermometer is no longer in the system it is measuring. By measuring the temperature of the liquid, you have changed the temperature of the liquid by moving some of the energy in it somewhere else.